Pretty Girl Club. I am not going to edit this video again because this is going to be a long one. So get your tea, get your popcorn, get ready to do your workout or to clean your apartment or whatever, because I just wanted to go on a rant about my experiences with the Black/MLS middle and wealthy class. So I'm just now realizing actually, so I said that both of my parents are from the hood. I actually want to give more context to what I meant by that. So when it comes to my dad, he technically is from the Black community. I shouldn't have called it the hood, but I guess it depends on what you consider the hood. Okay, so my father, his parents, they own their house. So they are what I would call house poor, or they were house poor, meaning that like Big Mama and them, they bought a house and stuff, but then they just didn't really have money other than like to pay the mortgage and all that. So I guess that is technically, that's not as hood as some of you guys might have been thinking. So he didn't grow up like in the projects or anything like that. So I just wanted to make that clarification. I didn't realize that that's what I did in my last stream about this. But another interesting point is my dad's family. So Big Mama and them, who are from, they have a background in Louisiana, by the way. So they actually are educated. Like Big Mama, she has her bachelor's degree and stuff. She is a part of a sorority, the Black sorority. I can't remember if any of my other family members are a part of any of those clubs and stuff, but I do have some great uncles on my dad's side. So these are unambiguous Black men who are Freemasons. Yeah, I know, Freemasons. A lot of people have like their conspiracies about them. But something else though is, okay, so like I actually heard somebody say that he's never heard of any non-Black men being a part of like the Masons. And that's actually a good point. I mean, I've heard about the Masons on YouTube, like conspiracies and stuff, but as far as like in real life, whenever I've been around people that are Masons or they do something at a Masonic lodge, usually it's somebody who is like Black that's in the Masons. Usually it's some sort of Black guy. And also me saying that my dad's from the hood, I guess that's technically, that's not as hood. Oh, and by the way, their house, it was not a shotgun house. I know what a shotgun house is, which by the way, I didn't learn what that was until about a couple of years ago. So they technically were not from a shotgun house, but as far as my dad's cultural background, he definitely grew up hanging out with a lot of thugs and stuff. So that's why I said he is from the hood. And I'm still going to say that because his behavior and his cultural background was hood. And I also want to get into that as well. I've noticed that a lot of Black men, my father included, even if they didn't grow up being a thug, or even if their mother and father are like professional. So for example, on my dad's side, my father's father was in the army, like he was in the military or whatever. By the way, I have a whole entire psychoanalysis on why I will never date a military guy, but I don't want to offend anyone because I know there are a lot of people here in the military, but I have family members in the military. So I think I'm probably very biased just because of some of the stories and stuff that I've heard. But anyway, so that actually is my dad's background. So I guess you could try to argue and say that technically my dad's not hood, coming from, his dad being in the military and then his mom being a college graduate homeowner. So, you could say that I was kind of stereotyping my dad's side, but I'm just judging it based off of their behavior and also based off of them being in poverty. My dad, he constantly told stories about them getting the lights cut off and like me, those are more stories that I associate with the hood, or I associate with being in poverty. He said that like their car got stolen, Big Mama's car would get stolen. It's been stolen multiple times. I don't know if she still has that same car, but she kept the same car. So she would like get it back. It would get stolen again. So that's why I said the hood, because those are the types of behaviors that I associate with it. And also the neighborhood that they lived in is a Black neighborhood, or it's a historically Black neighborhood. So now it has partially been gentrified. And so my great uncles, the ones who were the Masons, the ones that bought those houses back in the day, their houses are now they are now millionaires because all of their houses that they had, over in that part of the city, due to gentrification and kind of like the economics of my hometown, that area is starting to have like the prices go up and stuff. So, I mean, I still consider it hood though, just because of the cultural background and because of the poverty. So I associate that with hood stuff. Oh, and also I want to psychoanalyze my grandfather for a minute. So my grandfather is considered very handsome. Oh, And also my dad, first of all, let's talk about black male worship because I really do feel like my grandpa was definitely one of those guys where black women worshiped him. He didn't only date black women, by the way, and neither did my dad. But I noticed that my grandpa, he was very worshiped in the sense that he was considered very handsome. He dressed really, really well. And same thing with my dad. So my dad's phenotype, in my opinion, he looks like how Morris Chestnut or like Boris Kojo, he kind of looks like a mix between those two. I know that Boris Kojo is biracial, but my dad, he looks like a dark skinned version of either like a Boris Kojo or like a Morris Chestnut. And my dad is very tall and very like buff and built. He literally looks like a football player. So in fact, my dad actually has a male version of Pretty Privilege because we've been in the airport multiple times and random white guys will like start fangirling over my dad because if he wears a football jersey of like the city that we're from, people will start whispering. Like I've literally overheard people whispering. So we had landed in the airport in another city. My dad was wearing a jersey and all of these nice clothes from our hometown. So he had like an iPhone. He wears nice tennis shoes like Jordans and all that stuff. I don't keep up with all the name brand shoes, but I think he's into Nikes, whatever the newest Nikes are. And he also wears kind of designer clothing. That's a cultural thing I've noticed as well. A lot of African Americans are very heavy into designer clothes and shit. So that's why I said hood, because I associate all of those things with hood culture. Because as a person who didn't grow up around that, that is a distinct thing that I've only noticed amongst African Americans. And I feel like some African American people, they carry the hood culture with them into their wealth. And so that's where you get women making these comments like they're dusties and stuff like that, or, you know, kind of making these generalizations. But anyway, my dad, he would get mistaken for a football player to the point where I've heard people whispering behind his back, like, oh, is he so and so from the such and such team? And another time, my dad literally got free luggage. He did not have to pay to check his luggage because the guy thought that he was a member of a particular football team. So he literally let him get his luggage for free. And also, whenever my dad would wear jerseys, people would be like, oh, go team, go. Like they would say the name of the team, like, oh, yeah, I love the team, you know, because they would assume because of his expensive designer clothing coupled with his shirts, his jerseys, and his body type, they just assumed that he was like an NFL player of some sort. So that's another dynamic I noticed. I noticed with my dad, he is very much pedestalized, and I definitely feel like my dad received black male worship. To this day, actually, almost every black woman that has ever seen a photo of my dad, almost every single one has said, oh my God, your dad is so fine. And then they'll like be all weird. And I'm like, oh my God, that's my dad. Like, ew. Or they'll start asking me, like, do you have any brothers? Or like, you know, they'll ask about my brothers and shit. So that, I don't know if you would consider that black male worship, because sometimes I feel like when people use that term, you're worshiping them, you're pedestalizing that. What they really mean is you're just complimenting them. But I feel like black male worship is almost like this form of male centeredness. That's kind of what I associate with worship. So that's why I call the divestors kind of white male worshiping or non-black male worshiping and male centered, because you're literally jumping through all of these social hoops and kind of contorting yourself into this different person in hopes to snag one of these coveted white men or one of these coveted Hispanic men. You know, you're hoping to snag a coveted Asian man. But anyway, when it came to my dad's side of the family, I think that the black male worship is really the worshiping of black men who are attractive and or they have money. I've only noticed that only those two types of black men get the worship from what I've seen. So any other black guys that I've been around, if they're like some sort of hideous guy and they like have no money or something, I've noticed that they're just invisible. These are the red pill guys that you see online, or, you know, these are the MLS guys who come into my comments section bitching at me saying, oh, well, you guys don't like mixed race men. And it's like, no, we don't care. Like, we have our standards. That's really what it is. So that's another nuance that I've noticed that nobody else talks about on YouTube. Whenever they say black male worship, it's like, well, a lot of women, they're not just worshiping just any old black male. Maybe in the previous generations, I don't know. I mean, maybe Generation X was worshiping of just any black male or any male at all. But I just feel like that's more so just being male centered in general, as opposed to worshiping him because he's Black. So I've noticed, though, that there definitely is a special form of social power that Black men experience if they are an attractive Black guy. So kind of like my dad, my dad, he's been hit on in the airport. It was so weird. Like my dad came to visit me and my dad was saying how like Black women in my city, they were like walking up to him in the airport and shit, like trying to flirt with him and all that. So a lot of women, they'll talk this big talk on YouTube and try to talk like, oh, I don't approach guys, or I don't talk to guys, or I don't flirt with guys. Well, tell that to my dad, because a lot of women, especially Black women, will try to flirt with him. I noticed the same thing with my brother. My brother is kind of like, you could call him kind of a lighter version of my dad, I guess. He also has a similar build. All of us are tall with like nice bodies, or at least this is what people tell our family. So I have noticed that with Black men in particular, there is a form of social power that men can have. So this is something that a lot of women don't take into consideration when they are deciding their social strategy, whether it's dating, whether it's in the marketplace, like in the job marketplace or something. Men can have a form of social power as well. And I've noticed for Black or Black adjacent men, usually it's his attractiveness and it's his money, or kind of like his status, like his job title and stuff like that. Let's say he's a doctor or something. So in the case of my family, on my dad's side, there are a lot of people who are college graduates, they're maybe homeowners or something. That's still a form of status. It is still a small form of social power. If you go further back in my family, one of them was actually a civil rights activist. I actually have a picture of him with Martin Luther King. So that's a really big form of social power. I love flexing that, by the way. You can't say that I'm fucking anti-Black. I have family members that were in the fucking civil rights movement right next to Martin Luther King. How many people can say that? But stuff like that, kind of being this upwardly mobile Black person, that is still a form of social power, especially as Black men or mixed race men or whatever. Because I've noticed that for a lot of Black men, a lot of them actually are very powerless and very dusty. And so I've noticed, even in my own family, the men who have kind of risen above some of that, even if they're mediocre compared to the other races, I've definitely noticed that some of them, they definitely feel a sense of like entitlement almost. And I'm not saying my dad or my grandpa are like that, but that is a pattern that I've noticed amongst Black men in particular. So I would say, in terms of my father and kind of the men on my dad's side of the family, I would say that their confidence level was higher than the average run of the mill Black guy that you would come across maybe on YouTube or in real life. So that's just one thing I've noticed. So if you are kind of like a Black man of status, another thing I noticed was unambiguous Black women, whether they were in my family or just women that I knew, like family friends, they would be very competitive to get the attention of these upwardly mobile Black men. So you know how people try to critique my channel and then they try to say, you guys are mammies, or Exoticals are just, they're Black male centered, or they are mammies of some sort. And it's like, well, no, because I can tell you as an Exotical myself, I was raised in a multiracial and multicultural type of background. So I never had a preference. This is another thing. The whole preferences conversation. I've never had an actual preference until actually about a year ago or so. I've never had a preference. So I've never exclusively dated one type of guy or anything like that. I've noticed the ones who care the most about dating preferences have always been unambiguous Black women. And this is before I even knew what YouTube was. So I'm not even blaming this on colorism content creators. I've just noticed that that was a part of the Black female culture that I was around, where there was a conversation on dating preferences, or where mothers would talk to their sons about what they should prefer. And that leads me into my next encounter with the Black middle to wealthy class. So I told you that I went to a private school for a little while when I was in elementary. So I went to, it was actually a Black private college prep school. And the way that I got into that school was because Big Mama and her family, they knew the people at the school and stuff like that, because they kind of were around the educated, upwardly mobile Black people in my city. And this goes back to one of my family members working with like civil rights and stuff like that. So Big Mama, she was actually the first one to ever talk to me about HBCUs. And she really wanted me to go to Gr00ming University. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but that was the first HBCU that I had ever heard of. So they knew about each other because kind of the upwardly mobile Black class in my city, they were starting their own schools. So I know that depending on where you live, they may have like charter schools. Sometimes they have private schools, prep schools, Montessori schools. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that word right, but I ended up being able to go to this private school. And it was a Black one, by the way. It was a school where they were prepping you for college, and I didn't know that it was an HBCU. Like, I didn't know that that was a thing, Black colleges. So when my big mama, when she would say it's a Black college, I just thought that she meant Black people go there, so like it's not in this part of the city, it's in a different state where like other people who are Black go there. I didn't know that she meant a Black college as in it was literally created to help Black people and stuff. So I didn't know about that until years later, like literally over a decade later. But when I was at this Black private school, first of all, there were a lot of other unambiguous Black men and women who were sending their children to this school. So, like I said, think of the Cosbys, think of those types of Black people and their children. Those are the types of Black children that I was around. And by the way, a lot of this hood behavior that people talk about, getting your hair pulled, all of the classic stuff, I have a typical classic story just like that as well. The whole hair pulling shit, people fighting me and shit. So this is at a classy school. I'm talking like we are wearing uniforms. We are like, we're learning about all these cool things. Literally, Bill Gates came to our school. Like all of these kind of wealthy people would come to our schools and like talk to us back then. And this is in the early 2000s. So I don't know if this is because of the time period or what, but there was a lot of that hood behavior. But the mothers, even the Black mothers, they would say to their sons, look at Exoticals United, or like, she's pretty, or they would make comments like that. And it got to a point, and I'm not trying to like brag or anything, where all the little boys in the little class, they had a crush. And I feel like they only crushed on my phenotype, partially because of their background with their parents, probably. And it also could have been because of Black men kind of dating out. And when I say dating out, I guess I mean dating outside of their phenotype. So it's not necessarily that their wives were white women, because they really weren't. They were more so like mixed race women. They were MLS women. So another pattern that I've noticed throughout my whole life is that the MLS women do tend to attract kind of these upwardly mobile Black men, or kind of these high status, buff, attractive Black guys. And by the way, I actually was able to prove this when I did my people watching experiment. So if you follow my Patreon, or if you follow my members page, I talk about it on there. I've people watched over 10,000 Black people at this point, and I've just kind of taken note of their dating processes and stuff, or kind of like their interactions, and like who's dating who and what did they look like and what were their hairstyles. And, I was being a creepy article. So that is one thing that I've noticed ever since childhood, though. So I've noticed a pattern where the MLS women, if they have dated Black guys, they have tended to attract the wealthier or the more attractive Black guys. And when I say more attractive, I mean, I noticed a pattern where the guys are always either tall or buff, or they have like really nice clothes, nice style, or they have some sort of money. That is a pattern that I can agree with the colorism people. Like when they talk about preferences, the only preferences they care about is who the upwardly mobile or rich and attractive Black guys prefer. I don't see them talking about who a homeless, ugly Black guy prefers. And when I say attractive or ugly, I know that that's subjective, but that is a pattern that I have noticed ever since childhood. Usually, if an MLS woman is he was a dusty Black guy who had muscles or something, something like that. So that's something that I started noticing all the way back in childhood. Another thing that happened was when I was a child, and I'm talking elementary school. So sometimes the little boys, the little Black boys or MLS boys, their sisters, their older sisters would be like, oh, there's Exoticals United. Oh, there's your little crush. And they would encourage the crush. They would encourage their little brothers or tease their brothers about like having a crush. So I do feel like a part of child development and a part of how a child's like preferences are developed or whatever, or their sexual attraction, I do think that it comes from maybe their family or maybe their influences in the media. So I do agree with the colorism content creators when they say, oh, the media is influencing the children. Okay, but who else is also influencing them though? It's their own Black family members. And I can say this from experience. Another thing that I noticed though with the Black middle class and wealthy class is an obsession with looks and intelligence. So, I mean, obviously, everybody likes to look good and be smart, right? But when it comes to the Black community, I definitely noticed more women would like pull me to the side and they'd be like, oh my God, your hair looks so cute like this. Or like, how did you get your hair like that? How did your mom do your hair? Wow, your mom's like really good at styling hair. Or, they would have longer conversations about how to look good. I remember in my Black elementary school, whenever there was a rich white person coming to the school, like some sort of donor, or they had some sort of like little cute presentation. You know how in elementary school, sometimes they'll have the kids do like a cute little presentation to the adults who are visiting. They might introduce themselves and say, hi, welcome to Johnson Elementary, or, stuff like that. They would always choose myself as well as all of the other MLS students. So I definitely think that there could have been some sort of internalized bias. You know how some people say that a lot of unambiguous people get jealous because if you're an exotical of some sort, sometimes people view you as smarter or better or whatever. I feel like that could make sense in terms of my elementary school experience. I'm not going to accuse all of them of automatically being colorist, texturist, and featurist, but when it came to the experiences of others, like being put in front of white people and stuff, they would always choose the children that were not unambiguous mono dark skin Black girls and boys, like with the broad features and 4C hair. So I specifically remember this one girl. She was a dark-skinned Black girl and monoracial, and she always wore her hair in these little tiny twists. It had a lot of shrinkage. So looking back, her hair was not actually 4C, because 4C hair, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that 4C hair grows in an upwards direction. So her hair was still kind of growing in more of a downwards direction, but it just had a lot of shrinkage. So I'm going to say that her hair was probably a 4A. And I remember she got her hair pressed. She got it silk pressed, and everybody was shocked at how long her hair was. This is when we were in elementary school. And I definitely remember she actually was treated differently after she pressed her hair. So when her mom silk pressed her hair, she started wearing it in high ponytails, in little high silk pressed ponytails where it's kind of like flowing, kind of swinging in the wind a little bit. So her hair texture was a little bit different than mine, but it was not too far off. That's why I said I think it was like a 4A. So I noticed that the adults actually were some of the main ones who would put certain phenotypes of children on a pedestal or make comments about how their hair is so pretty. Like I specifically remember there was this one girl, I'm assuming that she was African, and I'm only assuming this based on the phenotypes of her appearance and based on kind of her accent. And she was unambiguous. She had 4C hair. Some people will say, oh, that's 4D hair. Okay, whatever. She had the coarsest type of hair that you could have. And I remember she was kind of invisible, so a lot of what they talk about on colorism channels, I felt like that girl, looking back, she was actually treated as invisible by the teachers, by the Black, unambiguous, dark-skinned women and men who were teachers. So I just want to put that out there. That is something that I noticed in the Black middle class, or kind of like the wealthier class. The teachers, you could argue that the teachers were technically not even middle class. I mean, who knows? But they were educated. They at least had bachelor's degrees, because in order to work at that private school, you had to have a degree. So now I want to get into relationships and stuff like that. Unfortunately, I have been in some sort of relationship literally ever since like kindergarten. I've always had some sort of guy that's been in my vicinity or talking to me, or there's a crush, or he has a crush on me, I have a crush on him, and he's trying to date me, or we're about to hook up or something. And when I say hook up, I don't mean sex, but so I want to start off talking about that as well, because I do think that grooming, unfortunately, has been a very big part of my childhood and upbringing. But I will say that I think grooming is a big part of a lot of girls' upbringings, though. So, for example, first of all, this is very inappropriate. Why did I have a first kiss in kindergarten? Like, doesn't that just sound fucked up? Like, why the fuck is somebody kissing me? He was a little kindergarten boy. So this guy, or this little child, his mother, who was an unambiguous Black woman, she loved me. She was like obsessed with me in a positive way. She was very nice. And her husband was actually a partial, he was like a part owner of a radio station or something like that. So they were not, they were affluent Black people. He was unambiguous. She was unambiguous. Their son was a little unambiguous Black boy. He was in kindergarten as well. And I remember every time they would see me and they would come to pick up their son, they would always talk about how, like, you guys are going to get married when you get older, and you guys would look so cute together, and you guys would have your own cute babies. So I had lots of Black adults from the time I was a child training me to be the wife of one of these affluent, I guess you could say, Black or mixed Black men. By the way, that was only one little boy. So the other one, he was the smart one. This was like the little boy that I actually liked when I was like in elementary or whatever. First of all, isn't that also weird though? Why am I even thinking about boys that young? Isn't that insane? Why are adults talking to me about boys, or like, how did I even know that? Like, just looking back at that, I just feel like a part of your childhood as a young girl can actually get ripped away from you by the adults, because they see maybe your phenotype, maybe they see your parents. Like a lot of people, they would obsess over my parents' phenotypes and how I look, or they would kind of make comments like, who does she look like more? Does she look more like her mom, more like her dad? For reference, my mom's phenotype is more like Selena or Vanessa Bryant, and my dad's phenotype is more like a Morris Chestnut or Boris Kodjoe. So I remember from the time I was a child having affluent, educated Black people kind of making comments about stuff like that, and how, oh, well, her hair looks like her mom, and this aspect of her looks like her dad, and then how is she going to look when she grows up? And, oh, here's my son, and you should date my son, and you should be with him. Like, looking back, isn't that weird? Like, I'm wondering, did they talk to this little African girl, the girl who sat next to me when I was in elementary school? Did they talk to one of the obese girls that went to that school? She was an unambiguous Black girl who was obese. She looked very similar to Gabby Sidibe. I'm wondering if they talked to her that way, or if they were only singling out my own phenotype. And by the way, I did notice from the time that I was a child, I noticed the same behavior, not just with me, but with any other little girl that had a similar phenotype to me. So when I say phenotype, I'm talking about things like skin tone, hair length, and texture is bigger than just colorism. And I have so many experiences to back this up, because from the time I was a child, a lot of people around me, they would talk a lot about hair. They would talk a lot about, this is also back in the early 2000s too, so I don't know if that played into it or not. I feel like colorism just became worse kind of more promoted with the rise of social media and with the rise of male-centered women using colorism to fish for compliments. But when I was a child, no, even the dark-skinned girls that had the long hair, they were also treated with a pedestal as well. And this was based on their hair length and their hair texture. In fact, when I was in elementary school, they literally ranked who had the longest hair in the school. I remember I had the fourth longest hair. So the girl who had the longest hair she was older. So the school that I went to, it was kindergarten, and they went up like a few grades or whatever. It was not just an elementary school. They had another school like attached to it. So one of the girls, she had the longest hair, Diamond has the longest hair, and then Princess, she has the second longest hair, and then like Shatina, she has the third longest hair, and then Exoticals United, she has the fourth longest hair. Like, why is that even a conversation? And like I said, this is with the Black middle to upper middle class. So I definitely feel like some of these behaviors, that's why I feel like just simply calling it dusty and moving on, I call it internalized colorism, texturism, or featureism. Or I guess you could say kind of a preference or a beauty standard where as a child, you're being made aware that you meet this beauty standard. So I was literally aware from kindergarten. Oh, I forgot to tell the kissing story, but I was aware from kindergarten that I met at least, this beauty standard within this school. So back to the little boy, his mom really liked me or whatever. She really wanted us to get married. And I swear to God, I'm not kidding. She kept on promoting me to him all the way until I was somewhere around 16 or so. I remember one time when I was older, she happened to see me in the grocery store, because I'm from kind of a smaller town. So we moved out to kind of the suburbs. And that's a part of why I stopped going to that school, because my dad, unambiguous Black man, he wanted us to get away from the Black community. He was actually the main one who said that. He said, I don't want them around all of those people. And like, he didn't like their mindsets. So saying that like all of this, all of the isms that they're only coming from the Black men, well, it's actually not just the Black men, it's the Black women as well. Because even my father recognized it and said, get her out of there. But this one Black lady who was obsessed with me being with her son, years later, she saw me in the grocery store and she was like, oh my God, Exoticals United. Oh, I haven't seen you in so long. Like, how are your parents? How's your sister? Do you have a boyfriend? Let me show you a picture of my son. So she would like pull up pictures of her son. I remember her pulling up pictures and just doing stuff like that. So that's something else I noticed is when it came to the Black middle to wealthy class, them talking about your appearance and talking about your intelligence, it was totally normal. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention, part of the reason why so many parents wanted their sons to date me from kindergarten was because I was one of the gifted, I guess you could call it maybe one of the gifted students, or like, that's part of why I left the school too, because the other school, the quote unquote white school in the white area, the other school that I ended up going to, they had better education stuff, So by the time I reached I think it was fifth grade. By the time I reached fifth grade, my reading and math and all that, it was too high up. It was kind of too advanced for their class. And I remember another thing that happened. This could also be a racial bias as well. Something else that happened was by the time I was in first grade, I remember the teachers talking about, oh, we want to skip her. Like, we want Exoticals United to maybe skip 1 grade, skip 2 grades. But my parents were like, no, like, why would I skip grades? And actually, I'm kind of glad I didn't skip grades because now I have more stories to tell. But the little boy that I ended up kissing, basically, the reason that happened was because other children and their parents would encourage us to basically have crushes on each other. So me and him both, like, I would say that we are both innocent actually, because we were so young, literally 5 years old, 6 years old. We didn't know what was going on. So I remember people like encouraging us to like each other basically. And then there was like this one scenario where we were on the playground and even the other students were like encouraging us to kiss each other. And then I remember we like kissed each other. It wasn't a makeout or anything. We were so small, literally around 5-ish, 6 years old. And then right after we both like looked at each other and we both were like embarrassed, like, wait, that was bad. Like, we shouldn't have done that. And by the way, this was in kindergarten. Oh, and we never got in trouble or anything for this. I don't remember if I told my parents. I don't think I told my parents because my parents are very, they're very devoutly religious. They're actually religious. They're not like what I experienced when I was in actually the Black community. So I've noticed there's a difference between the Black Christians and like the non-Black Christians. I'm sorry. It just culturally, there's a difference. But we didn't get in trouble for any of that. In fact, his mother, all the way up until I was about 16 or so, kept on promoting like us being together and stuff. So now let's go into 1st through 4th grade. So in 1st grade, there was this other boy. He was actually an MLS boy. He was an MGM, a multi-generationally mixed boy. He was a fellow nerd. So we used to kind of compete like in math. So I was only good at math in like elementary school. Once I got to like algebra and all that shit, that's when my math skills like went downhill. But when we were in elementary, me and the other little boys in the class, we would kind of compete with like who can do these math problems the fastest. We would have little trivia games in there where you have to solve a math problem. I actually had so many adults pressuring me because they thought that I was quote unquote so smart. I mean, thank you. I'm flattered. I think that I am smart, but I don't think that I was like Albert Einstein or anything like that. So by the time I got to 1st grade, I felt so much intellectual pressure from adults to the point where they would ask me, they'd be like, oh, hey, do this math problem. Or like, do you know how to do long division? I remember I actually got detention one time and I had to teach myself how to do long division. So like to this day, I still can't really do it, but now they have calculators. Anyway, so I had so much pressure on me by the time I hit 1st grade to the point where they would have me compete with these boys, like trying to beat them in these math problems and stuff. I remember breaking down and crying like during class. I remember I actually had really bad test anxiety. So whenever they would hand me a test, Sometimes I would start crying if I wasn't the smartest person in the class. So with these boys, I was the smartest girl, but in terms of like boys competing with me in math, they were smarter than me. Or they would sometimes like beat me. So sometimes I'd beat them, sometimes they would beat me. We had kind of this competitive thing going with each other. And it was more on a subconscious level because I didn't really realize what was going on back then. I just knew that I would cry whenever I couldn't solve a math problem. But looking back, that's called test anxiety. So this little boy in first grade, he was, I don't remember, I don't know what his mix was, but I'll just say that he's Creole just for, just as an assumption, because he looked like how a Creole little boy would look, and his dad looked like how El DeBarge would look. That's how his dad looked. His mom, I don't remember seeing his mom, but his father, the whole black father thing, you know how they say a lot of fathers are not in the home? So I agree with that. That actually is statistically true. And that's why you're never going to hear me promote dating any type of guy on this channel ever. But with this guy in particular, and with all the people in my school, most of them actually did have father figures. So I didn't really witness a lot of the black people around me who didn't have fathers. That was more so when I was older, when I went to an HBCU and I was around thousands, like tens of thousands of black people, then that's when I noticed a little bit more. But this guy, he would always promote his son to me as well. And I feel like in his case, he was a little bit less creepy and pressury with it because I don't know if maybe he didn't objectify me as much because I looked like him or I looked closer to his phenotype. This is another reason why when it comes to people saying they have a type or whatever, like I actually understand why people would date someone who looks like them. It's because if you have a phenotype that's heavily either fetishized or stereotyped or something like that to the point where you have traumas from it, being with someone who has your same phenotype, that could make you feel like more of a human, or at least that's been my experience. So with him, he was definitely nicer and stuff. So I used to see the dad after school and then he would kind of promote his son to me. And it was similar behavior, except without saying things like, you guys are going to get married. It was more so his dad, he would be like, oh, there's your crush. There's Exoticals United. Like, so he would say it in front of this little boy. So then I knew. And then same thing with his older sister. She would also say, where's your girlfriend? Exoticals United. And I remember her saying it in front of the whole entire first grade class before. And I remember like being kind of embarrassed or being like, wait, what? Is she talking about me? So having all of these adults constantly promoting relationships to me, or constantly talking about it, or constantly making me as if I'm some sort of, I don't know, girlfriend material or wifey material. I guess they were kind of judging it based on my behavior. Maybe they thought that I was classy or something. That's something a lot of people tell me in real life. Thank you. I try to be a classy exotical. But I feel like in first grade, that is so young. Like, how do you know if somebody is classy or if they're not classy in first grade? I just feel like there's really no way to know that. Okay, sorry, I just had to pause it for a second. I forgot where I was on the story, but basically with the little Creole boy, his dad and his sister would always promote that like he likes me, or basically I'm his little girlfriend. So again, why am I being groomed from kindergarten to be the girlfriend or wife of one of these kind of affluent black or biracial guys? So you know how they talk shit about Creoles and they say that Creoles are kind of like inbred, they breed with their sisters and cousins and whatever people who live next door to them, so they can keep their genetics a certain way or kind of like keep it in the family and all that. Looking back, I almost feel like that's what was happening on a subconscious level. So I'm not trying to say that all of these adults were evil, because I really don't think they were evil. Like I said, one of them, the guy was a pastor. The other guy, he was like a guy that was the radio station guy, and he was like another church type of guy. So most of these people, they were more like, they had Christian backgrounds. A lot of them had, kind of these Southern backgrounds. But I wonder in my mind if they were doing that to other little girls, because I just don't remember them saying that. Like, I don't remember any other girls getting called out and like, oh, that's his crush, or like, that's who he likes, or that's his little girlfriend. I don't have any memories of other girls being talked to in terms of being promoted as somebody's wifey or somebody's girlfriend and stuff. I just don't remember that. And so I just feel like I wonder if that was just myself or if that's just an exotical thing. I don't know if that's a Black community thing. But from the colorism content I see, they're saying that it's not, because they're saying that everybody is not a quote unquote preference or whatever. But I feel like the adults around me, the adults around myself, and also those other little boys, they were kind of shaping those quote unquote preferences. And they were doing it publicly, by the way, in front of other students in the class. So what is that colorism? Is that texturism, featureism, pedestalization? I don't know. And by the way, by the time I got to, so now let's go to like second through about fourth grade, there was this other little boy. This is a third boy. He was an MLS boy. I don't really remember what his parents looked like, but I remember him specifically. And I remember it was the same thing, mainly with his older sister. They were like, "Oh, you have a crush." And again, these were the little smart boys. We were all kind of the smart kids in the class. And we knew that we were the smart kids because the teachers would kind of fawn over us and talk about, like, "Oh, they're so smart." Like a lot of the Black, by the way, all of the teachers were Black as well. I forgot to mention that. All of the teachers were educated Black people, HBCU grads, or, they graduated from a state school or something like that. I remember the principal of the school, she was a Delta. She was a member of the Delta sorority. So the teachers, they would also say that I was a good student and stuff like that. So I don't know if maybe that was a part of what made the parents like me. But I guess my question is, why were they even noticing me to begin with? But there was this other little boy, and he was my little fake boyfriend. So I had actually learned from kindergarten, you're not supposed to kiss boys, like stop kissing people basically, or like you shouldn't do that, because everybody was kind of, in kindergarten, even though we didn't get in trouble, I realized, wait, this is not, there's something about that's like not right. Oh, and I forgot to say, in first grade, that is when I learned about guys liking butts and like touching people and stuff, because when I was in first grade, the little Black/mixed boys, they were doing this thing called pantsing. So they would pants you. So they'd pull down your pants and, but we wore uniforms. So I wore a skirt, the Catholic schoolgirl outfit. Those were literally, that's literally my adolescent uniform basically. So I was like wearing skirts and stuff, but I remember the little boys in first grade, they would try to flip up our skirts and like see our underwear and stuff. Or some of the other girls, they would like pull down guys' pants. And I don't know, that was kind of when I started to learn about that being a thing. Like, oh, there's something under your pants that people want, basically. So that was my first encounter with kind of learning about that, or like what that meant. Another thing that I forgot to mention, actually, so I did have one white substitute teacher in first grade. She was extremely abusive. I remember her throwing, so you know how they have the chalkboard and then they have that little eraser where you can erase the chalk and it's like it does a bad job of erasing. But yeah, so I remember her getting mad at us sometimes, and she would like throw the eraser. I remember her throwing the eraser towards my chair one time. She wasn't mad at me specifically, but she would just do stuff like that. So it was enough to where I remember it, almost 30 years later or 20 years later. So I noticed that with her, she was a white girl. She was obsessed with this one other teacher, actually. And he was he was 6'11" or something like that. He was super tall, like almost 7 feet tall. And he was a light-skinned buff guy. And I remember the teachers actually at the school, the Black women teachers and this white girl as well, they all thought that teacher was like so cute. And I remember them talking about it. So I guess you could say my internalized beauty standard, or kind of my thinking of beauty or desirability and stuff, I would say this is a part of how and when it was formed. So for me personally, it was not formed based on media and stuff like that, because I'm like 90% of the Black movies. I was not allowed to listen to secular music. I definitely was not allowed to watch music videos, especially if you think Big Mama and them with their Southern Baptist background, you think they're going to let me watch BET and like, rap music videos? No. So for me, and I think for a lot of other children, their standards and stuff were more so influenced by the adults around them, or them witnessing like, who does this person like and stuff like that. So as young as first grade, I remember the tall light skinned guy. So he kind of looked like how T.I. looks. So He looked like that except a taller version, and then he had twisties or something like that. So not locks, he had either twists or braids or something. His hair was kind of longer, and I remember the teachers liked him, and the white teacher thought he was cute. There was a biracial teacher there that liked him. So I noticed, okay, all the teachers, the girl teachers like this guy. They keep on saying that he's cute. So that's another distinct thing that I remember, but I didn't connect the dots yet. I didn't think to myself, oh, this could potentially be based on some sort of isms or internalized self-hatred. I didn't think anything like that. But that was something else I noticed. It was examining who the adults were liking and dating and stuff, or who they thought was cute. So this is another thing with the divestors. If you marry a white man and you have a biracial daughter, don't get mad when she likes white men, or if she doesn't want to be around black women or the black community, because you have shown her that that's what you like. You liked the white community. Or if you move out of the hood so you can divest to go to the white community, don't get mad if she says I want to be in the white community. Don't get offended when she does that same behavior. Because I noticed that as a person who, my parents, I've had that experience with my parents, because my parents they're both from kind of more like the hoods, or kind of like, I guess you could say, a black community, black/Hispanic, underprivileged types of community, people of color, basically communities with underprivileged people of color. So in the past, when I have made comments saying that I don't want to be around those communities, well, that's based on my experience that I had at the time. My parents worked their butts off so that I could be raised around quote unquote rich white people. And so they were then shocked when their daughter grows up and is kind of like wanting to be around a community that's not like theirs. And so that's the thing that a lot of divestors and people in these upwardly mobile scenarios, they don't realize that that's what's going to happen with their children. So just be prepared for that. So if you're a black and you have a white husband or an Asian husband or something, just don't get mad. If you dislike your blackness, don't get mad if your children dislike your blackness as well. But back to the little story about this boy in elementary school. So by this time, this is when other kids and teenagers and stuff, kind of their older siblings, they would try to like hook us up, like hook up the kids to have little boyfriends and girlfriends. So around this age is when I had this other little quote unquote boyfriend, and we didn't do anything except I remember him putting his hand in my skirt. So he was a child though. I mean, I'm not making excuses for him or for that happening, but I'm just saying like that type of stuff started happening to me from the time I was a child. So I remember he kind of looked at me like, oh, wait, I shouldn't be doing this. And I was kind of looking at him like, should he be doing this? I don't know if he should be doing it. I was kind of confused more so when I was that young, like elementary school. But around that age is when sex started to be like when I kind of knew what that was. So that's actually very young, second, third grade. Isn't that crazy? And it's like, why was I knowing about this stuff? Oh, and I forgot to mention as well, that was also the first time that I ever saw pornography. It was at school, actually. So one of the girls, she looked something up, and she typed in the wrong thing. She typed in something wrong. And then like some porn popped up. This was literally in the classroom at the private school. And then I remember she was so shocked that she pulled it back up on the screen. Like she typed it in again or something. And then she was like, oh my gosh. And then she like exited out of it. And then I remember the same thing happened again in fourth grade. This was also in the school classroom. So I guess they didn't have like the parental controls and stuff. I think me and my friend, we were trying to look up some sort of celebrity or some sort of magazine. Yes, this is back when magazines were a thing. And I think my friend typed in hot boys or something like that. And then, some porn popped up. But when it came to the little boy putting his hand in my skirt, everybody knew about that. And that was not a big deal. Like nobody got in trouble. Nobody got talked to about anything. My parents don't know about that to this day. So yeah, that's something else that happened. And then by the time I was in about fourth grade, I noticed there were kind of the same three boys where their parents in particular, they were mostly MLS boys, but one of them was like an unambiguous guy. Their parents or their families in particular would always kind of promote me to them and kind of make me like their crush. So I remember I ended up transferring schools because I moved to the suburbs. By that time, my parents could afford to actually move us to the best city in the state and then take me to the private school, which was actually the best private school versus the other one, which was a very good private school, but it wasn't as highly ranked as like the other one. Another thing that happened was some of the people, they knew my dad's bad reputation from when he used to hang out with people in the ghetto. So this is at the black elementary, the affluent one. So my dad, he didn't like that. He didn't want his children to be in the same vicinity as people who could afford. Basically, the school was kind of like too affordable for like trashy people. I don't know how else to describe it. He didn't want us to go to that school because it was like too affordable for like trashy people. He didn't want us to be socialized around those people, even though it was a private school. He didn't like that some hood ghetto people could get into that school. And so we completely moved to a suburb that was like way more expensive to where there were literally no people of color, not just no black people, but like damn near no people of color at all. And so that kind of sent the message to me that, oh, okay, so if you make it, making it is getting out of the black community. And I see that theme even still with like divestors to this day. So I don't know if you want to call my dad a divestor. Like, does that count? I don't know. But yeah, I've noticed that a lot of upwardly mobile, middle class to wealthier black people, they don't want to be around other black people that are lower class than them. And I've noticed that at the white, in the white areas, there were some trashy white people, but I've just noticed a lot of the black community that I've been around, they seem to be more lenient towards kind of trashier white people. And I'm thinking, yeah, no. But I don't know. I'm not saying my dad was lenient towards trashy white people, but he for sure did not want us mixing and mingling with anyone in the black community who was like considered lower class or kind of like trashy or ghetto or like their parents were still in the ghetto or their family members were still attached to the ghetto in any way. He didn't like that. So it was actually my dad's decision for us to go to this extremely expensive private school and, to move and stuff like that. And my mom actually struggled to pay for everything. And by the way, when it comes to psychoanalyzing my parents, I don't know if I've talked about this before, but my mom was definitely the more ambitious one in the medical field to the point where like she's been featured in books and stuff like that. So my mom has always been the, I guess you could say, financially ambitious and career, the ambitious one in terms of career. So I mean, I guess that's just their relationship dynamic, which I personally don't want that relationship dynamic for myself because I would not trade lives with my mom's marriage. I wouldn't trade lives with my parents. My parents, they've been together my whole life. They've been married for I don't know how long now, and they're still married to this day. But yeah, that's another dynamic I noticed was my mom was definitely more of the married single mother type as opposed to kind of this leisurely type. By the way, the whole concept of the soft life and just sitting around and drinking mimosas and shit, as a person who was raised in a multicultural background, I'm not going to say it doesn't exist because it does exist, but it's definitely not a common thing. So, yeah. And I noticed that the little boys who were like my crushes or the guys where people were, they were like as an adult, they all ended up going to college, graduating from college. One of them like became a rapper, which is really random. But yeah, I don't know if he went to college or what. I never caught up with that guy, but that's something else I noticed. It's almost as if the parents of the children, they will socialize that child like, hey, this is the type of girl you should like. She needs to carry herself like this. And this other type of girl is the girl you should not like. So I don't necessarily think that all kids are going to follow what their parents say, but yeah, that's something else. Another thing that happened was that I was known for being a smartass. So from the time I was actually around about 10 years old. So once I hit 10, this is when shit starts to hit the fan. When I hit 10 years old, that's when puberty started happening. So I started getting little teeny tiny boobies. I got a little, I was still very slim or whatever, but that's when I started hitting puberty. And trigger warning, this is when crazy stuff started happening as far as men or teenage boys being more kind of aggressive with me. So when I was 10 years old, this is when a guy offered to go down on me. Yeah, I was 10 years old. And he was a teenager actually. So that is another thing that was happening. I remember asking myself, you know, is this happening to other girls? And something else that happened was I noticed this other girl who had my phenotype as well. She also, like, guys started asking her to go down on them. And like I said, 10 years old. So I'm talking fourth grade, literally barely know anything about this. Like, I didn't really even know what like sex and all that was. I mean, I knew what it was, but I didn't know details of like what any of that stuff meant. I just remember saying no, though, to the boy. Like, I remember saying no. And this is also when the harassment started. Oh, and by the way, these boys, guess where they were from? They were from this upper middle class African American school. So these are different boys. So these were not the other boys where their parents were more like involved or whatever. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention when I hit 10, I remember one time the teacher, we were in fourth grade and he was putting the name tags on all the kids. And then he said he can't put his name, he can't put my name tag on, but he just said, you're starting to become a little lady. And I was like, oh. And so I remember adults, like male adult teachers, would kind of notice my little body or whatever. And yeah, as far as the guy who offered to like go down, he was actually a teenager. And I knew him because one of my friends, he was like one of her relatives who also went to the school. My friend, he asked her to go down on him. About a week after he had asked her that, I didn't know that that's what happened. I didn't know that this guy was like a predator, basically. She told me, like, oh, yeah, I did it. Like, I basically gave him head. So she gave him head when she was literally in elementary school and he was a teenager. So I remember thinking like, oh wow, like this is really bad, but I didn't tell anyone because I think part of it was because of my background. You know, I had been around. Oh, and another thing I forgot to say too is once I hit 10 years old, this is also when adult women started policing my body kind of. So they would say, so for example, I remember I had PE class and I would wear this tank top and sweatpants. So I went to a uniform school. So for PE, it was a big deal to wear regular clothes. And I remember I would wear a little tank top with like some sweats or something. And my mom or just other women around me, they would say like, oh no, you can't wear that because it's showing a little bit of midriff or it's kind of like form fitting around your breasts a little bit. And it's like, I barely had anything, like I didn't have anything to show, but okay. Or like, you know, my pants, this is back when low rise pants were in style. So it's like, oh, you know, your sweatpants, they're kind of low rise. And also I have a small waist. You already know if you have an hourglass shape and you have like a small waist with a big butt, not a big butt, but if you have a smaller waist and larger hips, sometimes if you purchase pants that fit your hips, it's going to be too big on the waist. So it's going to sag down. It might show your butt crack or something. Oh, and also I forgot to say, once I hit 10, this is also when my cousins, like at the family cookouts and stuff, obviously, you know, Black women, they're commenting on my jeans and my little booty, and they were kind of comparing me to my cousins, not in a negative way, not necessarily saying, oh, you know, this cousin looks the best, but they would say like, oh, you look like your cousin Nunu. Like I'm just making up nicknames, but they would be like, oh yeah, your body is developing just like Nunu's. Oh yeah, Kiki's body is like that. So they would say all of the cousins and like their nicknames and stuff. Yes, they had black names and black nicknames. They would be like, oh yeah, you need to like wear a thong or something like that. So this is when other women told me about thongs and how like I need to wear a thong because my butt is going to be showing. So, you know, you might as well just wear a thong. So if your booty is showing when you sit down, at least you can see a thong and not see your crack. Like, I don't know what the logic was there. Obviously, my mom was not having it and she did not agree with that. So I did not have any thongs. I was not allowed to wear thongs at all from the age of, I don't know, anywhere from 10 to about, it was a couple of years, unfortunately. So part of what was happening at this time in my life was this is when my mom was getting very busy. She was really busy working, and like my mom, she was still around, but she wasn't as emotionally available because she was trying so hard to probably save up money so that we could go to the really nice school, the super, super nice private school and all that. So I would say like my last year or two at that African American private school, those were unfortunately the years where I was molested the most. It was when I was starting to hit puberty. As soon as those little boobies came in, as soon as the little hips came in, by this time I was allowed to kind of wear my hair down and long. So you know how braids were in style, like the Brandy braids or like the micro braids and all that. So I wore my hair in braids, but it was my natural hair, just braided and just long. And apparently that was considered attractive. I don't know. Or like I would just wear it in these little twists. So you know how they have passion twists? So my mom, I really wanted to wear my hair down. I was not allowed to wear my hair down. Looking back, this is because people in the church, this was more so like because of the Baptist background. My parents, they had just come out of the Baptist church. Oh my God, why didn't I talk about that? But yeah, they had just come out of like the Baptist church. And so they would say a lot of comments like, you don't want to be fast, like you're being fast. So I was not allowed to wear my hair silk pressed at all, ever. Never was allowed. I was not allowed to wear it silk pressed or down and curly. Hell no, absolutely not, because that's too fast. You're going to get too much attention. So in order to get around that, I would beg my mom, like, can you twist my hair? So she would like twist it in these little, they look like how passion twists look, except it was my natural hair just twisted and down. And so that was considered pretty. I got all the attention or whatever. But unfortunately, that attention led to being molested. So we'll get back to the first guy in a second, but there was this other guy. So he was a fellow MLS guy. Oh, the first guy, he was unambiguous. The teenage boy that asked to go down, he was an unambiguous boy. The second guy, he was an older guy and a teenager as well. He was this biracial guy. And I remember one time I got detention. I don't remember why the hell I was in detention. Oh, actually, no, I do remember why. It's because the same girl, let's call her Shatina, from when I was younger. Remember how I said they ranked us based on our hair length? So she was the third highest in terms of hair length. So her hair was longer than mine, and I was the fourth highest. So she had started liking this one boy. Let's call him DJ. So she liked this one boy, and then like he didn't like her, and then she thought it had something to do with me. And I just remember there was some sort of confrontation that I had with her, and it was because of her liking this particular boy. So I actually do remember, because I remember that same day they made me like say sorry to her and made her say sorry to me, and I was crying. That was a very bad time for me because this little biracial boy that was in the detention, he tried to violently force me to suck his and we were the only two students in there. This was, I think it was either at the end of the day or a little bit after school, because you know how they have an after school program, or at least at my private school, they had an after school program within the school. So you know how some people, they go to like a community center or a daycare or something like that. My school had a thing where it's like after school, you could stay there all the way until 6 p.m. They had a separate, you just go to a separate building or whatever. So I was not in the separate building because I was in detention. And the guy that was supposed to be watching us, so he would not be in the class. He would just leave us in there. And this boy, he was sitting next to me and he kept touching my hair, first of all, and I never thought anything of it. I was just like, why does he keep touching the back of my head? To push my head towards his and oh my God, I don't know why I'm laughing at this. I should not be laughing. But I think it's really because it happened, unfortunately, so many times. But he tried to push my head down towards his D, and I didn't realize it at first because, I'm 10 years old. I don't know really anything about dicks and stuff. So I remember I noticed after a while, I was like, why do you keep trying to push my head down? And I was like, no, ew. Obviously I got freaked out. And then I had to stay in the detention though. So I remember I kept going to that detention. I don't remember if I went every day or if it was like just sometimes that I had to go to detention. I don't remember how they did the punishments there. Oh, that's another thing I forgot to mention was punishments. That's no longer legal. Like whoopings. Yeah, I'm getting my ass whooped, but I grew up, getting whoopings and stuff. But guess what? At this school, you were allowed to whoop children. So this was an African-American affluent school, but the parent had to give permission if you wanted to whoop the child thankfully I never got a whooping or anything, but there were some girls that got whoopings. But I guess looking back, The men were the main ones who were allowed to give whoopings to male and female students. So I do remember one time where this one teacher, he whooped this other girl and he would take her in the bathroom and give her a whooping. So I don't know if he was just giving her a whooping or if he was ever doing anything else. Like looking back, there are so many red flags from that school. So there was one day where I was sitting there and this time he tried to violently, forcefully push my head into his pants. And I remember he just grabbed my head this time with both. It's almost as if he was trying to, I don't want to say it was like head banging or something, but that is how harshly he tried to force my head to go down to his D. And obviously I was able to escape that one. So he technically, I didn't end up being forced to do anything because I just ran out of the classroom. So I technically escaped detention. So I disobeyed the rules. You know, you're not supposed to leave detention, but I didn't tell any of the teachers like what had happened or anything. So thankfully that kid ended up getting expelled because it turns out he was doing the same thing to other girls, like trying to physically force them to, you know, go down. But I just remember boys at the time, they started, and this is all at 10 years old. So there was that thing with the guy trying to violently force me to suck his, then there was the other guy who I'm going to get back to in a second, who had started offering to eat my, and then there was actually a third guy. He was also an unambiguous black teenage boy. And he, funny enough, this is actually the guy that my friend, the one with the third longest hair, she had a crush on that guy. It was that same guy. So this guy, he would ask to like hump me. So I didn't know really what that was. I mean, I kind of knew what that was. I was like, oh, okay, like whatever. I didn't say okay, whatever at the time. But I remember coming home from school crying sometimes. It was the same type of story, you know, where people would try to pull my hair and shit, or they talk shit about my hair, you know, the typical stuff like that. I remember getting made fun of for reading. Who makes fun of someone for reading? Like, isn't that insane? But anyway, so I did notice though that once I hit 10 years old, specifically, this is when older boys, they started kind of sexualizing me. Oh, another comment that the other Gillester made, the same one who tried to force my head on his, that same guy, I remember sometimes he would see me after school just wearing regular clothes, not in my uniform. And he would make comments like, oh, you look like you're 16. Like, you look like you're older. You know, so he would make comments about how much older I look. And this is in the early 2000s video vixen era. So I will agree, actually, that I did, you know, I'm tall. So I did technically look older. You know, I did actually look like, oh, and by the way, I was not allowed to wear hoop earrings. I remember my family, well, my mom in particular, they said I could not wear hoop earrings because if I wear the hoop earrings, it really does give more of kind of this vixen type of look. I just remember having a lot of a mix of emotions at that time because I was going through puberty. You know, there are teenage boys either wanting me to do stuff to them, and you know, my friends, some of my friends that I was around, they were starting to do stuff with guys. Like there was one girl, oh my god, why didn't I tell this story? Okay, so there was one girl who, she was actually very sexual, from that same affluent, this is an affluent upper middle class black type of school. So I will say though, private schools do offer scholarships oftentimes. So I think that a lot of the kids, they could have been on scholarships. And I'm not trying to downplay it because, you know, that's great. I think it's good that underprivileged African Americans can go to a good school. But yeah, so there was one girl, she was starting to like get sexual and stuff. So a lot of girls around me, they were kind of being groomed as well. So it was very, very normal. And now let's get into the perverted teachers. These are black men, by the way. So there was one time, by the way, I'm still 10 years old. We were playing charades. And actually, this time we did tell on the teacher, but I don't think the teacher got fired because I don't remember anything bad happening to that teacher. So they were playing charades, and one of the teachers wanted us to act out sexual scenes, like sexual acts. So I remember one time a teacher was like, oh, I want you to hump the floor, or like pretend like you're freaking the floor, like pretend like you're getting your freak on with the floor. So once again, we are 10 years old. We're literally fourth graders. So why is there a teacher or like some sort of after school daycare person who's black, by the way, and in a wealthy, classy, or supposedly classy private school. Don't even get me started about the white one, though. This is actually not as bad as my white. Wait until I get into that one. But with this one, I remember thinking like, oh, I guess maybe this is cool or normal. But I do remember starting to struggle with anxiety a little bit because I just felt like something was kind of not right or whatever. Like, maybe this environment is messed up. So now let's get into me going to my friends' houses. So I was actually not allowed to go to any of my friends' houses when I was growing up. And now that I am an adult, I can see exactly why. So unfortunately, anytime I would go to a friend's house, usually there would be some sort of older brother or cousin or neighbor or whoever who would come over and try to do stuff with me. And I'm going to get into some of it. So, by the way, trigger warning, you may not want to listen to this if you get triggered by stories of being molested and stuff like that. But I'm only talking about this because I just feel like this is another reason to decenter men as a whole, because a lot of guys that are adults now, they have a past of being crazy. Some of these guys that I'm talking about, these guys are now, college graduates. They have wives. They have, they're totally normal, very quote unquote classy types of guys. And unfortunately, this did not only happen to me with black men. This also happened with white guys as well. And same thing with the white guys. They're seen as upstanding citizens. They're being pedestalized right now at this moment. I just paused it. I had to do something really quick, but I forgot where I was at in the story. At around 10 years old, that is when a lot of people started reacting to my body just in general, because I had puberty. I was starting to be able to wear regular clothes after school. And this is because I just wanted to like be cute and be cool and not wear a uniform. So a lot of the other kids, they were wearing regular clothes, but I guess because of my probably phenotype and body type, I was considered to be cute or desirable. This is also when I noticed a pattern as well, because like some of the other girls that were around my age, 10 or 11, they were also called cute as well when they wore regular clothes. And they also had the same phenotype as me. That's something that I noticed as well. And again, with the hair thing, there was definitely some sort of hair fetish or like a long hair fetish. I don't know if I'll call it a fetish, but yeah, that was something that a lot of people talked about. But something that happened though was I remember I used to go to my friend's house, and this is because give me a ride to like my little cheerleading practice or, whatever I had going on. And so my mom, she was probably just trying to have help or whatever. And this is why I say my mom was more of a married single mother, because it's like, okay, where's the dad in this? Where, you know what I mean? It's like, what's going on here? And obviously, if you have two working parents, then they could be busy and stuff. But so I would go to my friend's house, and her brothers slash her brother's friends, they were the ones that would harass me. So the same guy that had asked if he could like go down on me or whatever when I was 10, he actually started gradually harassing me. So remember, I'm spending the night at my friend's house. This is her older cousin who goes to the school as well. So whenever he would be over there, he would start coming over there all the time, actually, because he knew that I would go over there. And he started saying stuff like, oh, I want you. I know you want me too, like kind of sexual innuendos. And I didn't really realize it at the time. I used to get actually very pissed off because I'm thinking, why does he keep on saying he wants me and he knows I want him too? Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? By the way, he was an unambiguous little black teenage boy, but he was considered so popular. So this is exactly how it would happen. So I was 10 years old. And this was happening from when I was age 10 to about maybe 11 or 12. And he was older. So he was always with like the basketball guys, like in the junior high area, like in the middle school, junior high area. He was always with the basketball players, the football players. He was very popular. He did not speak to me like at all, really, in school, because obviously I'm younger than him. I'm way younger. So why would he walk up and speak to someone or like, I mean, because 10 years old, that's elementary school. So why would he go all the way across to like talk to me or see what I'm doing? But I remember my friend, she was having a birthday party, and this was a co-ed birthday party. And all the girls at the school were like so excited to go to this party because they were like, oh, I'm going to Michaela's house and her fine ass cousin is going to be there. They would say stuff like that. And they knew that like the cousins who were the Gillesters, these were my Gillesters, all the girls in the school knew that the older cousins would be there. So everybody wanted to go because they had a big, beautiful house. By the way, these are unambiguous Black people. So they had a gorgeous house in the suburbs, basically. And everybody wanted to go. And then it turns out because his stepmom was white, she had different rules. And so they were doing where the girls could have a sleepover. So they had like a mother in law type of property thing. So the girls were able to have a sleepover in one house, and then the boys were actually going to be able to have a sleepover in the other property. So we were going to be separate. Everybody was going to be separate, but that was like the talk of the town. Everybody was like, oh my God, I really want to go. Like, that's going to be so much fun. Like, all these boys are going to be there. So I just remember at that age, there was starting to be a lot of talk about boys, boys, boys. Oh, I also forgot to mention with my friend, the one who did fall for the grooming, basically. Looking back, that was actually grooming. The same boy, the teenage boy, he had asked her to suck his, and she actually did. And that same girl, I noticed that she actually started liking him and stuff. And this is because, it's because of grooming, really. She was 10, 11 years old. He basically, I don't know if he unwittingly groomed her or if that's just his background, and maybe that was his culture. And so maybe that's just what he naturally did to her. I remember I asked my mom, like, can I please go to this birthday party? And I want to like hang out with Michaela, blah, blah, blah. And she found out that it was a co-ed party. She was like, no, absolutely not. And especially if people are sleeping over and spending the night, absolutely not. And I remember with my other friend who got molested, by the way, she also had the same phenotype as me. I don't remember if I said that. She had the same phenotype, but by this time she had become kind of thicker, kind of bigger. And the fact that she had like a big booty now, she was basically overweight or thick. She was like, she had a stomach, she had kind of a big stomach and a big butt. But by this time, I remember guys actually talking about her and talking about her butt and kind of like what they wanted to do, basically how they wanted to molest her. And this was just an open topic, like just nobody gave a fuck. Nobody really cared. I don't remember any adults saying anything. The adults at that school, they were trying to date each other and, just pay their bills, I guess. I don't know. Oh, another thing I forgot to say. I feel like there was probably more of this protect Black men mindset back in the early 2000s. So anyway, back to the birthday party story, the co-ed one. So I was not allowed to go to that birthday party, and I was the only one that missed out on that party. And I'm glad that I did, because it turns out that my friend, she got molested by the same guy that tried to violently force me to give him. So this was another guy. So I'm talking about 3 guys. So if it's hard to keep up with, well, yeah, it's because there were at least 3 Gillesters. And so I remember my mom didn't let me go. And I remember being sad because I couldn't fit in with like any of the cool kids, basically, or like I couldn't do anything. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere. So I remember getting so upset at that age, around 10 years old, because I was like, what the heck? I can't do anything. Let's fast forward to like a few months later. So by this time I was maybe like 11 or so, and I still kind of looked the same as far as puberty. I had little curves and stuff. I was kind of better at sneaking and lying and stuff like that. I wasn't really a liar though, but I remember going to this friend's house, and the same boy, he just kept saying, oh, I really want you. I know you want me too. And so I remember whenever I would go to my friend's house and her cousin, the popular boy, was there, him and his friends, they would usually be out in the neighborhood playing basketball. And like I said, this is a wealthy white neighborhood. These are like cul-de-sac neighborhoods. So it's not like somewhere in the ghetto. These guys were, I wouldn't call them hood. I would just call them predators. So they had this group that they came up with. They kind of made their own little nickname for themselves. You know how the Mean Girls movie, they called themselves the Plastics. So these boys, they had their own nickname. I can't remember what they called themselves, but it was like the Cool Guys or something like that. It was not the Cool Guys, but I'm just kind of making it up. They had a little name for like all the popular guys. And then they were like, oh, do you want to be a part of our group, like the popular group, basically? And I was like, oh, yeah. By this time, I was about 11 years old, and they were like, okay, like, I'll think about it. I'll think about if you can be a part of our group. And I was like, okay, whatever. And so I remember by the time I was around 11-ish, I was doing this math class. It was basically like this advanced math class where I had to go to the older students area so that I could learn my math stuff because I was too advanced for the other people that were in like 5th grade or whatever. So I remember in some of the little classes, he was in some of those classes and he used to pass me notes. He would say the same type of thing, like, I know you want me, like, I want you, or, just making little kind of sexualized jokes. He would also do like negging type of behavior. So throwing stuff at me, bullying me really bad, like throwing stuff at me in class. You know how kids like throw spitballs? Like he would throw spitballs and by the way, this was only in a private setting. So the way that they did it was they had this private tutor that would come in to teach math because this was not the regular class. So this was during the private tutoring thing. So it wasn't like this was in front of everyone. But he would do all that kind of stuff. So I was getting all these kind of mixed signals like, okay, why is he picking on me so bad and like throwing stuff at me, throwing spit wads at me? But then he's also writing me notes, kind of almost like I wouldn't call it a love note, but almost like a sex note or something like, oh, I know you want me, or like, I want you too, that sort of thing. And then, when I would go to my cousin's house or to my friend's house, he would make sure to be there whenever I was there. And then he would say how he likes my shorts and how like I look good in my booty shorts. And then my friend is trying to like hook me up with him or put me, make me be a part of the popular group. And so I still just didn't realize like, no, this is not normal. But I remember eventually this guy, he really wanted to get close to me. So he made sure to always be at her house whenever I was there. So it literally got to the point where every time I would come over, and at this point, I was going over there almost every weekend because I just wanted to fit in with my friends at that time. But every time I was there, him and the little football/basketball teenage boys were there. And so by this time, I was around 11-ish. And this is when he started flashing me his dick. So he had a big, apparently that's something that guys brag about. And that this is when I found out about it. I remember one day I was walking in their house. And remember, my friend, they have a very big house because they're wealthy. And this is the black man that married the white stepmom. And basically the kids and the cousins and stuff from the black family. So they were like from the hood because they were from kind of the first wife or the first, the black woman or whatever. So they would always come over because, daddy and stepmommy, they have this big, beautiful house with the whole mother-in-law thing in the back. So anytime I would come over there, he would literally, when I walk in the room, he would be like, Exoticals United. Then I would turn over and then boom, he's flashing his dick at me. And I'm like, oh my God. And it literally became a thing where I just knew anytime I was in a room with him alone, he would just whip it out. And by the way, this whole dick flashing thing, this is not just exclusive to him because another black guy, literally a homeless black guy about 2 years ago, just did this on the street. Like he was a crackhead, of course. But it's like, okay, is this a cultural thing? Like what is this? Are they just trying to show it off because they think like it's big, like you're supposed to like it or something? I don't know. But he noticed that I wasn't really reacting because again, I was so young. I just didn't really know how to respond. I didn't know what to do. I knew that it was not okay for him to be walking around naked, but at the same time, I didn't want to not be allowed to go to my friends' houses because this was the only family that my mom trusted because they were also living in a very wealthy area. So her and my dad, I don't know if they assumed that because of their socioeconomic status that maybe they were more trustworthy and safe versus like the quote unquote ghetto black kids that were also at the school. But yeah, so I didn't say anything. And then I remember we were watching a music video or like listening to music. You know how you could change the channels on the TV to where it plays music? So it wasn't like MTV. It wasn't a music video channel, but it was just a channel where it only plays the song. So we were listening to music one time. There were a whole bunch of us kids. There was me, my friend, and then him and his friends. And I remember he asked if we could turn off the lights so it could be dark, kind of like a party. And then I remember he turned off the lights and nobody thought anything of it. And I was just sitting on the couch. And then when the lights were off, he like sat next to me. And then I wasn't thinking anything of it still. And he basically kept on doing this to where anytime I would come over, they would be like, oh, let's pretend we're at the club and let's like, play like it's a party or something. And I didn't think anything of it because he would just sit next to me. And then another time they turned off the lights, we were quote unquote at the club. And then he sits next to me and he literally starts licking my arm and starts like licking me. This is like when we're in the dark. So I remember sitting there thinking like, just frozen basically. I was just frozen because I didn't know how to respond. I mean, again, I'm 11 years old. This is like a teenage boy, literally like a stinky teenager. So, by the way, another thing that I forgot to mention is that there were other girls that I knew on the megachurch. They were also being molested at that time. And these girls, they were taking it as like a sign of honor in a way, like taking it as, oh, this means I'm so hot, basically, because all the guys want me. So I do feel like my environment influenced me to be more like apathetic, like not really thinking anything of it or not taking it seriously because other girls, whether they were black, non-black, poor, wealthy, kind of in the suburbs, private school, public school, there were all kinds of girls around me that were currently going through similar scenarios. Maybe they weren't going through it in the same exact way, but a lot of those girls, they also didn't report anybody either. And so because all the other girls around me were either normalizing it or they were pedestalizing these boys, teenage boys and stuff, I didn't think anything of it. So yeah, I remember the guy, he like licked me randomly. There was another time when he was like, he would just start touching me just randomly, like touching my little boobs or whatever. And I just remember being frozen in the moment, just like sitting there kind of questioning actually and thinking to myself, so is this sex or like is this what sex is? Like I know I shouldn't have been thinking, I should have been thinking like how do I get out of here as soon as possible, but I just remember questioning to myself like, so is this what sex is? Like how am I supposed to feel about this? I just remember having so many different emotions or whatever. By the way, this one guy, he was not the only one that would do that. His other friend, the football guy, he would also do the same thing. So like whenever we were hanging out there, they would say, oh, let's play this game where we're pretending like we're at a party or at the club. And then I would go sit in my little corner on the couch, trying to not be a part of the party or dancing or anything for sure. I forgot to say, I'm in the middle of editing this right now, by the way. Please excuse the choppy AI editing. I'm trying to censor as much as I can. But they also would try to ask me to like dance or do a lap dance, like give them lap dances and stuff. And then I would obviously say no. But they would make comments about me and say how I should be a stripper when I get older. And looking back, I actually noticed this even with my brother as well. I remember my brother talking about like stripping and stuff like that. So I do believe that we could have potentially been fetishized or sexualized. And then there were some other weekends where I would come there and then him and his friends, they would say, oh, let's play, I think it's called Heads Up, 7 Up or something. It's a game where you sit at a table. So they had a large dining room with like a really big table. So we all sat around the table, myself and my friend, us being the only two girls there. And then it was like her brothers and her cousin and his friends. So basically mainly boys. So looking back, I don't know if anything happened to her or not. I never asked her. So I'm curious. I'm sure some stuff probably did happen to her as well, but I remember we played Heads Up, 7 Up, put your head down on the table, and then somebody touches your thumb, and like you guess who touched you. So I noticed that this guy, well, these two guys in particular, they always wanted to play games where it's like there's touching or there's dancing or there's like tickling and wrestling. So we would play like Heads Up, 7 Up, and then of course, every time we would put our heads down, somebody would grab my boob or they would grab my butt or they would like randomly try to kiss me or something. It was just totally normal because everybody was just thinking of it like it's not a big deal. Can you wear these booty shorts or can you wear short shorts? Like they used to really like when I would come outside to play basketball because apparently my shorts were like booty shorts. They really weren't. I mean, my parents didn't allow me to dress like that. You think my black father would allow me to wear short booty shorts? No. So I was just being sexualized basically. So, as I'm in the middle of editing this, I'm actually thinking about this because I told you guys that I have always had kind of a complex about wearing short shorts, and how my dad, he used to always tell me, like, don't wear short shorts and definitely don't wear short shorts with high heels. And now I'm kind of connecting the dots with me as a child wearing short shorts and then kind of being sexualized or molested after that. And even as an adult, with a lot of guys making comments on my butt or the shape of my butt and stuff. And so I just feel like this kind of affected my body image. It almost made me kind of ashamed to show my body throughout my teen years. And I do think some of it still carried over as an adult, because even to this day, I don't wear booty shorts still. I mean, that was actually one of my fashion goals, was to kind of like wear shorts more often and like get more comfortable in them. But looking back, now that I'm editing this, I do think that I potentially could have trauma attached to wearing short shorts. And I think that a lot of the women who were adults and trying to tell me not to wear skirts and short shorts, maybe they had traumas attached to when they used to wear skirts and shorts, and maybe they got molested or touched the wrong way, and so they saw me as a 10-year-old, maybe around the same age as when they got molested, and maybe they were trying to protect me. But yeah, that's just something I noticed while I was listening to this. But then I remember it got to a point where these two boys, they were like, oh, can we play like hide and seek? So it already started off, literally any game we played, I would get sexually assaulted. So with the scooter thing, if they're grabbing my butt or smacking my butt or whatever. I just realized I accidentally edited out the scooter story. So basically, when I would go to this friend's house, they had a whole bunch of bikes because they were like wealthy. So they had all kinds of bikes and scooters and stuff like that. And I did not have a bike. So they would let me use one of their bikes, and we would ride around the neighborhood. And sometimes, if they had a lot of friends over, like maybe 5 or 10 friends who were coming over to jump on the trampolines in their backyard and stuff, sometimes they would run out of bikes. So I had to ride, the Razor scooters. Remember those? So I'd be riding a Razor scooter, and the boys, they would come by on their bikes and they would just like smack my butt or like grab my boobs and stuff like that. And this is because I was denying their advances. I was kind of like closed off, and I didn't want to be their girlfriend or anything. They, like I said, they were like the popular cool boys. So I don't know if they thought that like everybody would like them, and especially because I was only 11 years old, I don't know if they thought that I would automatically like them. But yeah, so whenever I would ride the scooter, because my butt is just out, I'm not sitting on a seat or anything, they would just ride by and try to touch my butt. So yeah. With the heads up 7 Up thing, they're same thing, touching me. With the music game, where it's like we're pretending we're at the club, literally licking, like randomly licking me in a sexual way, not like in a funny way. And then we were like playing hide and seek. So what do you think happened when we played hide and seek? Of course, somebody would find where I was. And I remember one time I went and hid in their pantry. They had a really, really big pantry. It literally looked like a prepper, like if you're into prepping, it looked like one of those types of pantries. So I remember hiding in there thinking, oh yeah, they'll never find me in here. And then of course, this guy comes in and then literally whips out his D and randomly pokes me with his D, like when we're supposed to be playing hide and seek. And I remember once again being frozen and standing there confused, like, why did he just whip out, and just poke me? Honestly, this is very triggering to talk about, especially, for someone where this happened when I was 11 years old. So please don't attack me in the comment section. Yes, I should have probably punched him or something, but at that time, I just didn't know how to react, really. That's really what it was, because he was considered popular and cool. His parents lived in a beautiful big house. Everybody at school liked him. I was supposed to be complimented at the fact that these guys found me so desirable, I guess, to the point where they wanted to do this stuff. And another thing that happened too that kind of groomed me was he would compare me to the other MLS girl, the other girl with my exact same phenotype. The one who became fat, the one who he groomed before me, they would compare me to her and say how like I'm better than her, basically, or like I look better, or I'm just better in general because she's a hoe. They started calling her a hoe and stuff after she had been molested, basically. Okay, I just had to pause it again. This is kind of hard to record and to talk about, but I want to talk about this stuff because a lot of men and a lot of people don't realize that when I talk about decentering men, I'm talking about this because of safety reasons and also because a lot of guys don't realize how much some women have kind of been through at the hands of men. If anything, people should be happy that I'm not angry at all men at this point or that I'm not bitter or anything like that. But yeah, when it came to the guys trying to always touch me or kiss me and do all this stuff, it was because, or I mean, I felt like it was normal at the time because other girls, they really liked these guys. So it was almost as if other girls expressed admiration that I was receiving this kind of attention. So it was seen as a positive form of validation. So I didn't view it as being molested or anything like that at the time or being groomed. That was actually my first time being groomed. Unfortunately, it wasn't the last time. But another thing that happened was when we were playing the club game. So basically, anytime I was there, they would always have this routine where they wanted to play all these different games where they could try to like touch me and like say it was a part of the game. And finally, we were playing the club game, and one of them set up a sleeping bag behind the couch when we were in the living room area. So there were other people in the room when I was being molested. One of the kids, he set up a sleeping bag behind the couch, and then they were like, "Oh, we play like a combination of hide and seek or something, like with pretending we're at the club." They tried to make it this complicated game, but looking back, they were just trying to find a way to try to like get their hands on me, basically. And then I remember we played hide and seek, and I avoided any touching that round. And then this guy, one of the guys, he was like, "Oh, do you want to play 7 minutes in heaven?" And I was like, "What's that?" Like, I had no idea what that was. And apparently, that's a game where you're supposed to please the person for 7 minutes or make them happy for 7 minutes. Once he was like basically done, done doing the 7 minutes or whatever, then I remember I still was just laying there kind of frozen, thinking to myself, was that sex or like, what is that? I just remember being confused the whole time, thinking to myself, because I was only 11. So I was thinking, okay, is this what sex is? Or like, is this what people do? I've seen this in movies. Like, are you supposed to have clothes on? Or like, are you not supposed to have clothes on? Like, I just remember having all these questions swirling in my head. And then literally a few minutes later at that same night, like on the same night, the other boy, the other groomer, the one who was always running around naked and flashing his the same one, he came and like did the same thing. So like getting on top of me. I still had my clothes on. That's why I said it's technically being molested. It's not being raped. But yeah, I remember that just basically was something that was happening a lot. And because it was so normalized, because I was like kind of being groomed by the people around me, and they told me that this means that I'm pretty. This is what other girls my age were telling me. Like, this means that you're pretty. It means you're like desirable. It means that he likes you. And I remember there was one particular time, this is crazy. So his grandfather passed away, was there at the house, and it was like late at night. It was like 1 a.m. And I remember his cousin, my friend, I was spending the night, and she came in the room. She was my age, by the way. She was only 11 years old. And she was like, "Oh, our grandpa just died. Like, my cousin, he's going to really need you tonight." And I remember thinking, "Oh, okay, like he just needs comfort, basically." But isn't that crazy? That means that my friend, who was also 11 years old, she had to have been heavily groomed to where that was normalized, because she was just talking about this stuff as it was as if it was not a big deal at all. And also, I remember like looking back, that's extreme grooming. That's very emotionally manipulative. So because a guy's grandfather passes away, this means that I should just like, not try to complain or avoid him if he tries to touch me once again. And at that point, that sort of behavior had happened, I don't know, at least 30 times minimum. And by the way, I did not end up going into his room or anything like that night. One interesting thing that happened was, so if you are a victim of like being molested or being groomed, something that happens is Stockholm syndrome. So you start liking the person that you were with or whatever. And another thing that happens is sometimes when people are doing this stuff to you, like, touching you or whatever, your body is still going to respond. You're still going to get aroused. They're doing it on purpose because they know that you're going to get aroused. Like maybe if they touch you a certain way. And so when I was that age, I definitely remember having almost like this Stockholm syndrome where it's like I liked him at the time, or I ended up liking him after he, molested me or whatever. And by the way, if you're somebody who has gone through this, you don't have to feel bad or feel guilty about it, especially if you were super young, like how I was. I just wasn't really aware of what was going on to me emotionally. I just knew that like apparently this was a good thing. So I would say that one of my experiences that stood out with the Black middle and wealthy class is definitely a grooming culture. This is also something that I experienced in the white wealthy class as well, and even more so than this story here. But yeah, I might make another episode like this. If this was really triggering for you to listen to, I'm sorry. But part of the reason I'm anonymous is so I can be transparent and help other women to feel like you're not alone. It's okay to speak on your experiences. It's okay to talk about what has happened to you. I'm not going to allow shame to stop me from sharing my truth. But something else that happened, I forgot to say this. I eventually I stopped going to that school, the wealthy African American school, and I ended up going to the quote unquote white school. So I didn't see that guy again until about ninth grade. Turns out he had transferred to this other school, and I was a cheerleader at the new school, at the white school, and he was going to this other like white school that was playing football against my school. And by the time I saw him again a few years later, I remember like he had developed a whole bunch of acne. He never grew past that height. So even though he was tall in middle school, he never grew past like 5'8", 5'9". And I remember like it was actually a culture shock when I saw him because I had grown so much in my confidence and self-esteem by the time I reached about 14 years old. He was either a senior or graduated or something, but when I saw him, I was just so shocked at like how he looked and everything. He definitely had like an incel look. But yeah, so that's something else that happened. Those are just a few of my experiences with the Black middle and wealthy class, and that's only my experiences from age 5 years old to about 11 years old. I haven't even gotten deep into my experiences in high school and college with kind of the affluent Black middle class, because I'm going to get more into kind of this grooming behavior and how common it was for the women, usually Black women, Black teenage girls my age, or maybe their mothers, parents, whatever, to kind of groom the women like myself into being almost like these real life video vixens or something for these guys. But what do you ladies think? Let me know in the comment section and I'll talk to you next time. Stay pretty, ladies.